This man's face can't change at will. His head constantly changes. He can't become a woman or a man. Good and evil transform into each other. He can't simultaneously have three faces. He asks the wealthy woman in front of him whether she's willing to accept him, forever be together. The woman takes a deep breath. She puts on the necklace symbolizing the contract, accepts the monster in front of her. The next second, she experiences stomach pain. The fetus in her belly is about to be born. The woman's name is Deirdre. She was born into the ancient witch family, Mayfair. She is the purest blooded heir. Therefore, she is under strict control by the family. After her mother's death, Deirdre could see the strange man who appeared just now. The man's name is Lasher. He parasitizes the necklace left by her mother. With prolonged interaction, Deirdre develops feelings for him. However, there is no possibility between them. The girl soon meets a new boy. They meet at her uncle's costume party. After a passionate night, the boy is dealt with by the family. Meanwhile, Deirdre becomes pregnant. Her memories of that night are blurred. She seems to have seen Lasher appear. The priest is concerned that the child in Deirdre's belly carries the bloodline of the mysterious man, Lasher. He wants to keep her locked up at home. Deirdre doesn't want to be controlled by the family anymore. She climbs onto the balcony, intending to end her life. Lasher saves her and brings her back. He says the child in Deirdre's belly will change everything, but the child is taken away as soon as it is born. Her aunt falsely claims that the baby died due to a heart defect. In reality, the baby is given to someone else to raise. Deirdre develops a mental illness as a result. She stops speaking. Meanwhile, her child Rowan grows up. She is now an excellent neurosurgeon. Due to her short time as a doctor, she has to listen to mediocre senior colleagues. Their relationship was already strained. Recently, her foster mother's condition worsens. She goes to seek help from her senior colleague. She hopes to work as an assistant at a stem cell research company to arrange for her mother to receive treatment. The senior colleague deliberately makes things difficult. Rowan becomes extremely angry. Suddenly, she realizes she can't touch the person's blood vessels. With a little force, the fragile tissue immediately ruptures. The senior colleague faints on the spot. Rowan tells her mother about her sensation. She thinks she's just imagining things, but Rowan knows that her sensation is real. This is not the first time she has seen the interior of a human body. Rowan wants to find her biological mother and study her genes. She wants to discover the cause of her special abilities. Her foster mother says the adoption agency won't disclose any information. While she secretly contacts the agency, she asks them to pay attention to Rowan's birthplace. The other party's abilities have already begun to awaken. It is evident that her foster mother knows about her special heritage. That night, Rowan's file manager calls. He said he sensed the presence of Lasher. Lasher is still in New Orleans. This indicates he hasn't found Rowan yet. The responsible person will help protect Rowan. Rowan's foster mother breathed a sigh of relief. Although Rowan worked hard and traveled for her illness, the process was not smooth. The man in charge of the cancer experiment was very arrogant and shallow. They had a dispute. Rowan's abilities activated once again, causing the other person's blood vessels to rupture and die. She ran home and cried to her foster mother, but her foster mother had made a pact with the Mayfair family to conceal Rowan's identity for a lifetime. In the end, the foster mother died of cancer. Meanwhile, a new family doctor arrived by Deirdre's side. He seemed to know about the special nature of the Mayfair family. The doctor took off the person's necklace. He suspended the sedative injection, hoping Deirdre would regain her consciousness soon. Lasher took the opportunity to escape. He arrived outside the cabin where Rowan was living. He finally found the bloodline heir. He attempted to awaken Deirdre with familial ties. The woman seemed to have a genuine response. She even shed a tear. Meanwhile, Rowan began searching for her biological mother. Soon, she discovered her foster mother's lies. The adoption agency that the other party mentioned didn't have any relevant information about her. Rowan's mental state was worrying. The hospital required her to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. Only if she was deemed fit could she continue her rotation. The person in charge took the opportunity to sneak into her cabin. They assessed Rowan's condition based on the traces of her life. Rowan was currently in a dangerous period. At that moment, Rowan almost unconsciously attacked the psychiatrist. She quickly left the hospital. Unexpectedly, the car was covered in bird droppings. Rowan, feeling agitated, looked at the flock of crows on the tree down. The next moment, the crows suddenly dropped dead. The person in charge witnessed all of this. Rowan wrapped the bird corpses in her coat. She quickly drove away from the scene. The person in charge followed her. Rowan took the bird corpses to the beach for burial. Trembling, they took out a sedative and consumed it. Due to excessive fatigue, she fainted. Rowan saw her foster mother in a dream. The other party entered an old house. Rowan immediately followed. When she woke up again, it was already evening. Rowan got up and left the beach. She hadn't gone far when she noticed someone was following her. The person in charge appeared. He grabbed Rowan, wanting to have a serious conversation. As a result, he was accidentally injured by Rowan's ability. Rowan called for help. She took advantage of the chaos to open the person in charge's phone with his face. There were indeed photos of her being secretly taken inside. There was also a woman in a wheelchair. The house in the pictures was the same as what Rowan saw in her dream. She was getting close to discovering the truth. She was about to ask for clarification, but the person in charge ran away once he regained consciousness. The photos were labeled with New Orleans. Rowan planned to find that house. She boarded a plane and set off. On the way, she carefully looked through the photo album. She discovered a picture of the person who appeared in the cabin that night. As soon as Rowan landed, she started asking around for information. She learned the address of the house from a local tour guide. The guide agreed he would take her there at 5 p.m. On the other side, Lasher successfully awakened Deirdre. The family doctor helped her deceive the caretaker and continued pretending to be in a vegetative state. The next day, Deirdre successfully fooled her and she took the opportunity to leave the house. She hadn't left the room for decades. The caretaker didn't stop this poor woman. Deirdre relied on her memory to find her uncle. She claimed that her daughter was still alive. She knelt down and recited a spell. She initiated a visual sharing with Lasher. The other party found Rowan's hotel. Rowan was currently taking a shower in the hotel. There was a mark of hotel tea on the table. It turned out that Rowan had already arrived in New Orleans. Deirdre immediately went to find her daughter. However, the person in charge contacted Rowan first, and he convinced her to meet and have a detailed conversation. While Deirdre was on her way to the hotel, she unexpectedly encountered her aunt in the lobby. She pushed the old woman aside and went to find her daughter. Rowan happened to leave the room to find the person in charge. Both of them acted almost simultaneously. The elevator door opened with a ding. The mother and daughter met. Rowan recognized the person as the woman in the photo before the two could recognize each other. The next second, Deirdre's neck was slit open. She fell to the ground. Rowan had just found her mother, only to face separation by death. The police arrived to take statements. They asked Rowan to be readily available for questioning. The aunt, who was still at the hotel, came over to say hello. She confessed that she was Rowan's relative, Carlotta from the Mayfair family. She wanted Rowan to go with her, but the other party left the hotel directly. Rowan approached the person in charge outside the door. Feeling that he must know the truth of the matter, the two returned to the person in charge residence. The person worked at an organization called Tara. The organization, since the Middle Ages, has been dedicated to researching supernatural events. He instructed Rowan to freshen up first, and then he would explain. People from the organization arrived downstairs. They set up barriers to protect the witch from being harmed by Lasher. Rowan discovered the person in charge had many gloves at home. It turns out that the person had the ability to see images related to the object when touching it. The gloves could isolate this ability, yet he couldn't isolate Rowan's attack. In the Mayfair family, not everyone has abilities. There are also ordinary people without magic, like Aunt Carlotta and Deirdre's uncle. The person in charge instructed Rowan to stay in the apartment. He was going to investigate the killer who murdered Deirdre. The hotel was in chaos when the uncle arrived. The body had been taken away. Lasher was also nearby. He couldn't approach Rowan's apartment for the time being. The person in charge entered the elevator to investigate. Unexpectedly, he couldn't see any images. Someone had cleaned up the scene. The person in charge went to investigate the body. He placed his hand on the deceased's forehead. He could see Deirdre's tragic memories, and someone followed them into the elevator. The person in charge sent the suspect's photo back to the organization, waiting for them to verify the identity. In the other apartment, the person in charge's sister visited. She saw Rowan without surprise. While the two were chatting, the house suddenly caught fire. They could only go downstairs. Rowan decided to go find Carlotta. Meanwhile, Carlotta was about to deal with Deirdre's necklace. She gave the necklace to the nanny, hoping to bind Lasher to an ordinary person. She locked the nanny in the basement, but the necklace didn't accept this new owner. It compelled the nanny to repeatedly crash into the walls. Rowan didn't know Carlotta is ruthless and cunning. She wants to stay at the other person's house. She was attracted by a funeral procession halfway. The deceased's family members forcibly pulled her along to experience the local customs and bought a drink for Rowan. After drinking it, she became somewhat disoriented. Then she followed the procession. Lasher, wearing a mask, seized the opportunity to act. He deliberately approached Carlotta. He was born with the ability to attract witches. With Lasher's help, Rowan saw the spirits of the deceased in the graveyard. It was an experience she had never had before. The two of them were chatting happily. Rowan was enchanted by Lasher. Just like her mother and grandmother, he fell into the trap of his gentle demeanor. Rowan was led to his mother's old house. Deirdre suddenly appeared. She hugged her daughter tightly. Rowan didn't know what was happening. The other person died in her arms. How could she be alive again? Deirdre wanted to convince her daughter to bond with Lasher. Rowan immediately became clear-headed. This person is definitely not her mother. The next moment, she was back on the street. Everything that just happened felt like a dream. Meanwhile, the person in charge returned to the apartment. He knew Lasher had been there just by touching the wall. He was the one who set off the fire alarm, and Rowan walked over. Thankfully, nothing unexpected happened to her. The person in charge led her into the house. After listening to Rowan's recent experiences, he reminded the other person that Lasher could shapeshift at will. The deceased's family members on the road and the old houses Deirdre were all him. Don't be deceived, the person in charge Saturday next to Rowan. He said he saw Deirdre's memories. She didn't abandon her child. Rowan was taken away forcefully. The person in charge could feel that pain. Deirdre must have loved her daughter very much. To confirm the details of Rowan's encounter with Lasher, the person in charge decided to probe her memories. In the moment they made contact, countless emotions surged together. Although they didn't find any significant clues, the two of them were forced to understand each other better. Rowan is going to attend the funeral. The ceremony is hosted by Carlotta. The other party just disposed of the nanny's body. The necklace is now missing. Most likely, Lasher took it away. The funeral starts soon. The members of the Mayfair family gather. The uncle cuts a strand of Deirdre's hair and keeps it safe. Immediately after Rowan arrives, the priest announces the beginning of the funeral. The church doors suddenly open. A large amount of panels flood into the room. This is probably Lasher's way of bidding farewell to Deirdre. Shortly after, the person in charge receives a phone call. The organization has identified the suspect's identity. He must go there. Rowan is left alone to continue the ceremony. She accidentally sees her own tombstone. After all, the family members believed she was dead. Carlotta invites Rowan to return to the old house to attend the reception. Give the other person a photo of the foster mother. It turns out the foster mother was also a member of the family. Carlotta expressed, the women of the Mayfair family are born with unfortunate destinies. That's why they sent Rowan away, to spare her from following in the footsteps of those before her. Carlotta took the opportunity to warn the other person to stay away from Lasher. The uncle interrupted their conversation. A lady took Rowan to a room. The portraits of past family leaders hung on the wall. All 12 of them were women. They all wore the same necklace around their necks. The woman said, Rowan will inherit the estate. The uncle will handle the relevant documents. Rowan goes outside to talk to the other person. The uncle hands a business card to Rowan. She is welcome to come anytime to handle matters related to the will. Carlotta asks Rowan to stay for dinner. Rowan happens to explore the place where her mother used to live. A butterfly flies by. It draws Rowan's attention upstairs. She follows the stairs to Deirdre's bedroom. The necklace is placed on the dressing table. Rowan picks it up and puts it on. A strange feeling washes over her. Carlotta, outside the door, sees her fascinated expression. She immediately speaks up and interrupts her. She asks Rowan to get ready to go downstairs and eat. On the other side, the person in charge meets the suspect. It was indeed this person who followed into the elevator and strangled Deirdre with a rope, but it's clear that he was hired by someone. Right at that moment, the suspect's neck suddenly twisted. The person in charge approaches to investigate. It turns out to be Lasher who has done it. Could it be that he came specifically to avenge Deirdre? The truth behind the woman's murder becomes even more perplexing. The higher-ups order the person in charge to withdraw from the investigation and focus on protecting Rowan. The person in charge went to look through the Mayfair family archives. He discovered that the necklace was repeatedly mentioned inside. This necklace was closely connected to Lasher. Right at that moment, Rowan sent a photo. In the picture, there was the necklace. The person in charge was afraid for her safety. He immediately went to find her. Meanwhile, Rowan was having a meal over there. Carlotta was getting agitated. She kept blaming Deirdre for causing her so much trouble. This pre-meal prayer would be her last prayer for Deirdre. Carlotta performed a ritual. She turned around and set the hanging painting on fire. Rowan noticed that something was wrong. She wanted to leave this place, but the door to the dining room was locked. Carlotta wanted to die together with her. The fire grew bigger and bigger. Fortunately, the person in charge had arrived outside the door. He noticed that Rowan hadn't replied to his message. He climbed over the wall to get inside. Carlotta heard a man's voice outside. She raised a dining knife and rushed towards the door. The person in charge happened to open the door. He blocked a knife attack intended for Rowan. The two of them quickly left the kitchen, and Lasher appeared. He approached Carlotta. He said that Rowan would ultimately belong to him. The old house's front door closed. The witch was locked up by the villagers in preparation for execution. She angrily recited an incantation. Suddenly, a large fire ignited around her. The flames gradually converged into a human form. A long-haired man emerged from within. He strangled the executioner. He walked slowly towards the woman. He made a covenant with her. His name was Lasher. He was destined to merge with the witch from the Mayfair family. Several centuries passed in the blink of an eye. Rowan, the successor of the new witch, fell in love with a human man. On this evening, Lasher locked the two of them inside the old house. He attempted to prevent the situation from escalating further. The next day, Rowan and the person in charge woke up in the old house. They had actually forgotten about the crisis of the previous night. The person in charge even woke up early to prepare breakfast. Everything was strangely calm. However, problems soon arose. The two of them kept repeating the same action. The person in charge kept making breakfast repeatedly, but the eggs in the egg carton were always full. The knife wound on his waist became increasingly painful. He soon developed a high fever, but neither of them remembered how they got injured. Rowan finally noticed that something was wrong. She came to attend a funeral. Why had she been lying in the bedroom all this time? Rowan ran to the bathroom to get clothes. A knife fell out of them. She quickly told the person in charge. The person removed his gloves and gripped the knife handle. He activated his sensing ability. He vaguely recalled the events of the previous night. He had been stabbed by Carlotta. The person in charge's wound needed immediate attention. Rowan dressed and called for emergency assistance. The phone had no response. She helped the person in charge downstairs. The front door simply wouldn't open. Rowan went to check the other doors and windows, discovered that everything was locked from the inside, and the glass couldn't be shattered either. This must have been the work of Lasher. She was at a loss for what to do. Suddenly, the person in charge came over with breakfast. Rowan noticed that the person's wound was gone. She asked what was going on. The person in charge said that Rowan had been hit on the head. There was a mild concussion. It must have caused memory confusion. Downstairs, the real person in charge was still at the door. His wound had worsened with an infection. The situation was extremely critical. Just then, a man appeared out of thin air. The person in charge recognized him, who belonged to the Tara organization. He had been sent to protect the Mayfair family's witch, but he had mysteriously disappeared and vanished completely. The man suddenly turned his head. He warned the person in charge not to fall in love with the witch. Otherwise, he would end up like him, trapped forever in his house by Lasher. After the man finished speaking, he disappeared at the end of the stairs. Meanwhile, Lasher was impersonating the person in charge and getting closer to Rowan. He even thoughtfully poured coffee for her. Yet, observant Rowan noticed that he wasn't wearing gloves. In that moment of exposure, he disappeared without a trace. Rowan immediately went downstairs. The person in charge was already in critical condition. Rowan, after all, was a doctor. She rummaged through the cabinets for medication and alcohol. She treated the wound for the other party, but due to Lasher's interference, she couldn't see the inside of the wound. Rowan stood up and shouted at Lasher. She expressed her willingness to stay, but he had to release the person in charge. The next second, the person in charge disappeared from the old mansion. A formal dress emerged on the bed on the second floor. Rowan obediently changed into it. Meanwhile, Lasher was waiting downstairs. He took her hand and started dancing. He delved into Rowan's consciousness, probing all of Rowan's thoughts. Lasher used his abilities to confuse Rowan, just like they did with Deirdre, once again controlling the descendant of the Mayfair family. He suspended Carlotta in midair as punishment. Rowan asked Lasher to release her, but Lasher claimed that this place was under her control. Rowan had no intention of harming Carlotta. Naturally, she would be set free. Rowan didn't believe Lasher's words. She ran to the second floor to search for an exit. To her surprise, she saw Carlotta's sister. The sister was trapped in this mansion and unable to leave. With her sister's guidance, Rowan found a diary. It stated that an escape required holy water and herbs. Rowan followed Carlotta's sister into the basement. The herbs are planted inside. Nevertheless, she couldn't distinguish the types. Then the lights and the door were closed. Rowan tried to convince herself that it was just an illusion. She silently repeated, "I want to open this door." The door to the basement actually opened in response. Rowan walked into the living room. Carlotta was still suspended in midair. She tried to command the release of the other person. Carlotta immediately fell to the ground. Lasher disappeared in disappointment. Carlotta told Rowan there was another way out. She led Rowan to the second floor. To Rowan's surprise, she tried to persuade Rowan to jump off the building and commit suicide. To avoid being controlled by Lasher, Rowan was completely disappointed. She tapped into her wizarding abilities. She threw Carlotta down the stairs. Lasher appeared immediately after. He was pleased that Rowan killed Carlotta and realized the truth about herself. Mortals are not worthy of being enemies or allies with witches. Lasher's purpose was accomplished, so Rowan left the old mansion successfully. She returned to the residence of the person in charge, but Lasher allowed Rowan to come into contact with witchcraft abilities. Fortunately, the person in charge noticed that something was wrong. Although he couldn't see Lasher, he could sense his presence, but the house was heavily protected. Lasher shouldn't have been able to break in. Could it be that he had already established a connection with Rowan? The person in charge noticed the necklace on the other person. It must have served as a medium. Rowan took off the necklace. As expected, Lasher disappeared. The person in charge prepared to put the necklace back in place. Rowan suddenly went mad. She snatched it back. She kept shouting that the necklace was hers. It seemed that the events in the old mansion had indeed disturbed Rowan. The person in charge embraced her to comfort her. He took the necklace back and left. The next day, the family's younger sister, Tessa, came to find Rowan. She discovered a forum targeting witches. There were people spreading messages inside. They claimed to have obtained Deirdre's heart. Tessa wanted Rowan to return to the family, to fight against these people together. But Rowan wasn't in the mood to get involved in these matters. She just wanted to get rid of Lasher as soon as possible. She went to seek help from her uncle. He said he could help Rowan inquire about it. His relative, Dolly, might have a solution. As a return favor, Rowan had to help manage the family business. On the other side, the person in charge returned to the organization. He took off his gloves and held the necklace. A memory unfolded. A woman was tied to the square by the king's witch hunters. They told the villagers that she was a witch of Satan. She had to be executed. The woman was skilled in medicine and had saved many villagers. While everyone ignored her pleas for help, they shouted to drown the witch. The woman was locked in an iron cage, and the witch hunter took out that key necklace and locked the cage. Nightfall came. People gathered around the cage. They wanted to witness the witch drown with their own eyes. The woman kept chanting spells. Her will to survive was incredibly strong. She actually summoned celestial fire. The flames gradually converged and took shape. It transformed into Lasher's form. He wanted to rescue the woman in the cage. The situation was reaching a critical moment. While the person in charge was knocked down by Lasher, he passed out directly. Meanwhile, Rowan went to the Mayfair family hospital, following her uncle's suggestion to come and help. The other person's daughter, Little Jo, led Rowan on a tour. Unexpectedly, while walking halfway, she suddenly had a hallucination. It was an ominous sign. She immediately took Rowan back to the old house to meet the legendary Dolly. This person indeed knew how to get rid of Lasher, but Rowan had to transfer the power to a female relative, and there would be a certain cost to pay. Dolly handed Rowan a box. Inside were dolls made from the remains of past witches. It also contained Deirdre's hair. Next, they only needed to wait for the transfer ceremony to begin. Meanwhile, the anti-witch group was having a meeting. Enzo, who stole Deirdre's heart, was among them. He was a morgue attendant. He came this time to offer the witch's heart. On the other side, the transfer ceremony had already begun. Dolly gathered all the female heirs. They each kissed the dolls. Then they surrounded Rowan. Everyone chanted the incantation together. The other witches gradually stepped back. Only Rowan remained kneeling on the ground. All the candles around extinguished. Her eyes gradually turned white. Right after that, Lasher appeared. He couldn't believe Rowan wanted to give up the gift bestowed upon him, leaving behind a sentence. "This is risky." Then he disappeared in the old house. Rowan suddenly felt suffocated. She unexpectedly spat out that necklace. Dolly picked it up. She approached each witch with it. It ultimately chose cousin Tessa, but Rowan felt a wave of disappointment. After Tessa obtained the necklace, she immediately left a message for Enzo on the forum. She falsely claimed that she was going to report the witches, ready to give the person who stole Deirdre's heart a hard time. Unexpectedly, the other party had already seen through Tessa's identity. They surrounded her with members of the anti-witch organization. Tessa called for Lasher while holding the necklace. but no one responded. These people captured Tessa and took her to an abandoned factory. They locked her in an iron cage. Enzo wanted to extract more secrets from the witches, so he removed the cloth from her mouth. Tessa's ability was to bewitch people's hearts. She tried to confuse him. Enzo indeed couldn't resist. He also helped Tessa take off her blindfold. When their eyes met, Tessa's ability became even more potent. Enzo took out a key. He was about to unlock the iron cage, but he was interrupted by others. Enzo immediately regained his senses. The organization's members wanted to burn Tessa alive. The girl could only desperately call for Lasher, but Lasher refused to appear. On the other side, the person in charge was still trapped in memories. Just when he was in despair, he faintly heard his colleague's voice. The other person told him to find the key necklace. As long as he got that, he could escape from the memories, but the necklace had already been taken by the woman in the cage, Susan. Just when the person in charge was clueless, Susan's sister suddenly arrived. She asked the person in charge to go with her. Meanwhile, Rowan's situation was also terrible. She felt a little life inside her. She wanted to contact the person in charge for advice, but the call didn't go through. She sought help from the Mayfair family. They said Tessa was missing, and little Joe saw a prophetic vision, discovering that Tessa had been kidnapped. Rowan expressed, anyway, Lasher was with the other side, so there wouldn't be any danger. She still provided clues for everyone, saying that Tessa had been wanting to seek revenge on the person who stole the heart. Tessa's mother didn't appreciate it, blaming the other party for her daughter's situation. She even believed that Lasher hadn't left Rowan at all, and asked her to recite a spell to prove herself. Rowan was afraid to finish the spell, so she called Lasher back. She wasn't willing to take risks easily. Tessa's mother called a diviner for help, using her own blood to find her daughter's whereabouts. Tessa's mother had too many children, and the bloodline was complicated, so it didn't work. Rowan suggested using her blood, because Tessa and Deirdre's hearts were in the same location, and she was Deirdre's biological daughter. She would definitely sense the correct location. The diviner tried again, and indeed found the location of the factory. Yet, Dolly also noticed that Rowan was pregnant. She told her uncle about this matter, but the most important thing now is to rescue Tessa. On the person in charge's side, he was led by a little girl to Susan's presence. The necklace was hanging around the other person's neck. The person in charge was about to retrieve it, but Lasher suddenly appeared. It turned out that it wasn't Susan's memory, but Lasher's memory. That's why the person in charge was trapped here. Lasher warned the other person to stay away from Rowan, as Rowan was already pregnant, and no one could tame a witch. To suppress her powers, Rowan would summon Lasher again, and after saying that, he disappeared with Susan. All the exits of the cottage were sealed off. The person in charge felt a change in the surroundings, and had to escape immediately. Because Susan's room had many herbs, the person in charge used the limited materials to make poison. He drank it all in one gulp, and surprisingly escaped from the memory. Meanwhile, Uncle got in touch with the leader of the Tara organization, explaining that Rowan was already pregnant, and was heading to the Lafayette forest. The leader hung up the phone, immediately urging the person in charge to set off, but he didn't take the other person to support Rowan. Instead, he drove the car to the outskirts, and threw away the keys, preventing the person in charge from finding Rowan. The leader and uncle wanted the witch to summon Lasher. They wanted Rowan to fulfill an ancient prophecy, and usher in a new era. On the other side, Rowan had already arrived at the factory. As soon as she entered, she started killing people. Rowan only needed to move her thoughts. She couldn't make the blood vessels of these people burst. The blonde woman picked up a handgun and aimed. Rowan immediately burst the other person's eyeball, causing the bullet to miss and hit her shoulder. Rowan endured the pain and rescued Tessa. The other person returned the necklace to her cousin. Unexpectedly, Enzo suddenly fired a shot, hitting Tessa in the neck. Rowan, in order to save her, had no choice but to put on the necklace and summon Lasher. Enzo immediately fled. Rowan commanded Lasher to catch him. The other person was just a mortal. He was soon trapped in a secluded cabin in the dense forest. Lasher obeyed the command, released a raging fire that burned Enzo to death. Rowan also avenged Tessa's death. Lasher approached the other person, making her feel the forest with her heart. Rowan's surroundings suddenly changed, and she unexpectedly entered the place where her ancestor Susan lived. The first Mayfair witch was not only a healer, but also a midwife. She engraved all her knowledge in the rune, leaving it for future generations of the family. Rowan felt the abilities left behind by Susan. She looked at the bullet hole on her shoulder. She could even see through the structure of the blood. As long as she focused her mind, the bullet hole would return to normal. She passionately studied this knowledge, completely falling in love with this ability, but this also meant that Rowan had to accept Lasher's parasitic presence. The two of them merged in this illusion. The leader of the Tara organization was preparing to use their abilities to erase the person in charge's memory, completely removing him from the game, while the person in charge expressed that Rowan was carrying their own child, and if their memories and existence were abruptly erased, it could likely cause a butterfly effect, disrupting the entire course of events. The leader was convinced by the person in charge's argument and instructed him to leave with their subordinates. The person in charge immediately went to find Rowan's uncle, taking the opportunity when the other person was not in the office, touching each item on the desk one by one, attempting to uncover their secrets. When the person in charge touched a mask, he discovered that Uncle had strangled the boy from the party that year and had walked towards Deirdre on the bed, resulting in Deirdre becoming pregnant with Rowan. Actually, it's about Uncle. He tainted Deirdre in order to impregnate her and orchestrated her murder, all to ensure that Rowan would gain his mother's power and be completely under his control. Now Uncle has disappeared, and nobody knows where he went. After hearing the words of the person in charge, Little Jo led him back to the old mansion. She took out a doll made from the remains of generations of witches and handed it to the person in charge to investigate. The person reached out and touched it, finally revealing the mysterious veil of the witch's prophecy. It turns out that the prophecy made by Susan and Lasher was to wait for the moment of witchery, where Lasher would fully materialize over the remains of the witches from past generations, without relying on any external objects. The 13th witch is the final piece, and Rowan is the descendant of the 13th witch. The baby in her belly must be the flesh of Lasher. Little Jo mentioned that the witch's remains are all in the family tomb. The person in charge immediately set off. On Rowan's side, she woke up from her dream and found that Lasher was gone. Her belly suddenly swelled. The front door of the house was instantly sealed. Immediately after Lasher's voice sounded, he asked Rowan to wait for the moment of witchery to arrive. Rowan escaped through the door behind her, completely unable to understand the current situation. Everyone in the room stood motionless. Only the clock kept ticking. The black substance on the walls continued to spread. Rowan couldn't find any clues as her consciousness struggled in the delusion. Uncle dragged the unconscious Rowan into the car. He wanted to ensure that Lasher would be born smoothly and cure his own illness. Meanwhile, Rowan found her mother's apparition. The other person touched her belly and said that Lasher was inside. Midnight was approaching. Rowan suddenly realized. In the next second, the entire illusion turned black. Her physical body was brought to the tomb. When Rowan regained consciousness from her coma, she found Susan coming out. As a midwife, she was there to assist in delivering Lasher. In the next second, Rowan's belly started to ache. With Susan's help, she successfully gave birth to a baby boy. Rowan took the baby in her arms and suddenly noticed his face pulsating. She immediately put down the baby and ran away, but the baby grew rapidly and started crawling on the ground. Uncle tried to snatch the baby, but was petrified by Rowan's magic. Rowan carried the baby and walked out of the tomb, coincidentally encountering the person in charge. The person took the mother and baby away, wanting to take over the baby and control young Lasher. But Rowan sensed the intentions of the person in charge and immediately summoned a lightning bolt to draw a clear boundary between them. She would never give up her baby or the powers of the witch. Rowan carried the baby and left, heading towards the future she had chosen. The series ends here. The goddess of the masses Daddario, combined with supernatural themes, attracted a lot of attention from the beginning of the show. If you like my channel, please subscribe to it.